What's happening, guys? This is William Craddock from Will to Win Gaming. I'm here to bring you not really a deck tech or a primer. I'm just going to kind of talk about the deck I ran at the Treasure Cup and the changes I would make and how I executed each different matchup to lead me to a winning record. Alright, first, let's start with the changes. The only thing I really changed going into the Dallas Treasure Cup, which is in 3 days now, is I'm taking out one Raizo, where I had 4, and putting in a 4th 7-drop Eustass kid. The reason I'm doing this is just because I expect a lot of kid, and the 7-drop kid, to me, is the second most important card in the mirror. First off, let's start with the kid mirror. You'll notice my list does not run Basil Hawkins. My reasoning for this is pretty simple. I believe the better people get at this game, the worse Basil Hawkins gets. I played a very good kid player, and he had his Basil Hawkins on curve, and it was just so easy to play around it. You know, I dropped my 7-drop kid, I had no Okiku, and I never gave him targets for Basil Hawkins to be effective, and that ultimately is what won me the game, because all he had was this 5-cost 6k vanilla, essentially, that can never make an efficient attack, simply because I didn't give him targets to attack. And to me, that's why Basil Hawkins is not that great. On the other hand, the 7-drop kid and the Okikus are able to, first Okiku can rest Basil Hawkins if you're worried about it when she attacks. But more to the point, the 7-drop kids get to be aggressive and they can block, essentially doing what Basil Hawkins does, but better. Now let's move on to the Zorah matchup. I tend to think this is incredibly kid favored, maybe 7-3, possibly even an 8-2, meaning out of every 10 games, kid will probably win 8 of them. For most of the time with Zorah, I'm just taking early hits down to 2 life, even 1 life, and trying to establish a big kid. If you can, you want to try to get 2 of them simply because Otama Jet Pistol exists. But for the most part, your Okikus, your Nekomamushis, your Punk Gibsons especially, your 7-drop kids, your killers, everything in your deck is quite effective against the Zorah deck. And generally, it's just not a tough matchup. However, if you let yourself drop too low without being able to establish a board, they might be able to finish you off with the unexpected in-game threat, such as a Shanks. So you need to watch out for that. Moving on to the other red deck in the format, let's look at Luffy. I think Luffy is an interesting deck simply because it can be built so differently. For the most part, I'd say my game plan against Luffy is not that much different as against Zorah. You sometimes need to commit more resources to control their board, simply because Ben Beckman's a 9k, Shanks is a 10k, and some of those Luffy decks play 4 Shanks, 4 Ben Beckmans. But at the same time, establishing a kid with a blocker in play, your Okikus, your killers to kill their early game, it's the same game plan. You just have to watch out for Luffy having more of a in-game curve and be able to finish you off with a large character like Shanks. I'd probably say it's a 6-4 in favor of kid, depending on what the Luffy is playing. All right, next we're going to talk about the red-green law matchup. This is the matchup I heavily favor of going second. There's kind of some cute things you can do with going second that surprised my red-green law opponent. The main thing was he started off with a Tony Chopper. I put 2 Dawn into play, past my turn. He starts off, and this is good sequencing, attacking my leader with his leader before doing anything else. Now I use Punk Gibson to not take a damage and rest his Chopper, giving me a free attack on his Tony Chopper. This isn't really important, but if you think about it in terms of a law deck, you've removed his blocker, now the rest of his board's open season, and it's one less character in play for him to use his leader ability. There's a lot of things that, to me, in this deck kind of just crush the law deck. You have your Okikus, Nekomamushis, you have your Lost, recycle your Nekomamushis, and just pick off all their little guys so they can't use shambles. So overall, I'm going to call the kid versus law matchup an 8-2 in kid's favor, just because it is tough for them to win sometimes, and I haven't found a strategy using the law deck to really combat this. All right, moving on, let's talk about Daffy. Now, I am not much of a Daffy player, and I've only played against a handful of times, but from what I've seen, as long as you execute board control and play a big kid, Daffy really has a hard time beating you. I've yet to play a Daffy player of that, really high caliber, that guy who's going to win a major tournament with it. So it's hard for me to say for sure. Just on paper, they cannot deal with big kid very easily. Maybe if they have a couple of Mihawks and you're not pressuring their life, they'll be able to deal with it. But otherwise, I think it's a pretty tough matchup for Daffy. Maybe not as tough as Law or Zorah. So I'm going to go 7-3 in kid's favor. Next, let's talk about the big boy, Kaido. There's a lot of talk about whether or not Kaido has 6-4 or 7-3 in his favor against Kid. I would say mainly it comes down to the Onigashima Island. I feel like if they don't draw Island, Kid is favored, maybe 7-3. I think if they do draw the island, it flips the other way. Ultimately, I found as Kid, if you just make 2 attacks a turn, 2 efficient attacks turn, like I'm saying, 5-5, next turn you do 7-7, next turn you do 9-9. Sometimes it is enough to get there against Kaido. I think there's a few cards you want to play on curve if you can, such as Okiku and your 7-drop kids because they're so strong. 7-drop kid can't be killed by starter deck Kaido. No Kiku early can clear any blockers, letting you make efficient attacks to kill them, like a Higurashi. All in all, I'd say it's a very fluid matchup, but I wouldn't be afraid of it in tournament unless they draw their island, and then you might have to hope to get lucky to win that game. In conclusion, I'm not sure if my Kid build is perfect. I know it's very tailored to how I play the game. I think Kid is so strong, not because it's necessarily oppressive, but it's so consistent on what it wants to do, and you can tailor it to your individual play style. As you can see, mine's very late game oriented. I believe most Kid matchups are won in the second turn and the 5th or 6th turn, not necessarily that kind of mid-game portion. So that's how my deck is tailored. I've seen kids that are more low to the ground. They have the Momonosuke's. I haven't really seen a kid with more late game than me. I do play 4 of all the big boys. But all in all, it's an incredibly customizable deck. I'm going to take it into Dallas just like this. And I hope to make another top 16. So hopefully this video helps you. If you like my content, please like and subscribe. And I'll be coming at you soon for Paramount War. I have a bunch of deck lists ready to go. I'm going to be streaming, recording my online regionals. And I will have some practice sessions with some of the higher skilled players in the game currently. So hopefully you can tune in and get a look at some of those. And I'll see y'all next time. Bigger.